The Counterfeit Church, written and narrated by Sean Carney. Are pastors, tithing, property and programs really necessary? Or are they a hindrance to the true purposes of God? You be the judge. After ministering extensively throughout Asia, the Middle East, Europe and North America during the 1960s, the Lord led the Carneys and their 5 children to the north side of Auckland, the largest city in New Zealand. There they began to pioneer a church that was to have a significant impact on the whole church nationally and the community at large. In 1972, this growing body of believers, known as New Life Fellowship, miraculously acquired a tract of land where a convention centre and facilities for a Bible school and Christian campground were established. This beautiful location with its own private beach became the scene of many wonderful events accomplished by God. It was the venue for many conferences sponsored by the Church for Christian Leaders. Speakers from many parts of the world came there to minister to God's servants as they gathered from all over New Zealand, Australia, and from as far afield as India, Southeast Asia, and South Pacific. They were attended by ministers from every mainline denomination to be challenged and blessed. During Brother Carney's 6-year tenure as chairman of the Pentecostal Ministers Fraternal in Auckland, a milestone was achieved. For the first time in the history of the Pentecostal movement, a conference for all the streams of Pentecost, both classical and independent, was held at the church's convention centre. Accepting an invitation from Brother Carney, Jack Hayford, pastor of Church on the Way, came as the guest speaker. All the leaders in the nation, without exception, attended. As they lived together for 5 glorious days, the Spirit of God broke down barriers, allayed suspicions, paving the way for the formation of the Associated Pentecostal Churches of New Zealand. This association of churches and ministers went from strength to strength for a season, until vested interest eventually won control. In 1979, the Carneys travelled to the United States for a sabbatical along with their family. Returning to New Zealand in 1980, they sold all the possessions and went back to the US. They lived there until they moved to Australia in 1987. Since then, Brother Carney has travelled in Asia, US, Canada and Europe extensively. In addition, he has authored many books on the unstructured church life. Introduction. Has the church divorced itself from reality? For several years now, some of us have been giving serious thought to the very makeup of how we do church nowadays. I fear that the church has so separated faith issues from life concerns that it has opened up a huge gap between religiosity and reality. In so doing, it discourages us from being ourselves in church, since being ourselves is presumed to be other than what's acceptable. Take, for example, the way we speak. This religious kind of language is so unintelligible that if we were to conduct our business life in this manner, we would be labelled as weird. If we spoke to our doctor in such a manner, he would send for little men in white coats to come and take us away and have us admitted. Preachers sound different to the rest of us. Their religious vernacular sounds like a different dialect. This meaningless, jargon-laden preaching solicits alienation and even a silent rage among the faithful, and is the butt of so many jokes among the irreligious. It's embarrassing. There's a sermon for every problem. Prayer fixes everything. God saves the day. The faithful triumph. The good always prosper. But our lives seem more complicated than that. It's not to say that we don't believe in the power of prayer or the faithfulness of God, but the way it's presented publicly in church services makes it less real than it really is. It's all become rather artificial and Pollyanna. When every prayer is answered and every testimony has a happy ending, we start to feel a growing sadness that there must be something wrong, because life isn't always like that for us and for most of our friends. As we feel increasingly alienated from the faith that's dished up in church, we've finally come to realize that some testimonies don't build faith, but in some cases they're just a big put-down. And so over a long time now, a silent, festering kind of anger has been developing among thinking saints. So where is the avenue for the expression of these feelings, simmering away inside so many of us? Well, it will not be found in the church, since we seem to have developed faith communities of silence. Many of us must remain mute, and when it's all over on Sunday mornings, all we're left with are our feelings of genuine sadness and disappointment. In other words, we must be less than ourselves in church. You only need 3 skills to get by in church nowadays. You have to be able to sing, to listen, and to give. It's all you ever need on any given Sunday. That's a promise. It'll get you through 6 worship songs, a lengthy monologue, and don't forget to take a lump of money along with you. It'll save you any embarrassment when the offering's taken up. If you're not much of a listener, but more of a talker, I'm sorry, you'll just have to learn to be seen and not heard. It's called having a teachable spirit. Have you noticed that the only people who talk about our need to be teachable are those who want to do the teaching? I'm finding as I travel among Christians of all persuasions the same feelings of alienation, rage, sadness, and silence. It's as if we're all looking for some places where we as Christians can be ourselves and speak freely. And surely it's only through frank, honest conversation and interaction that genuine learning and personal growth can take place. There has been a resurgence of house or cell groups, which some say is the place for such interchange, and that may well be in many churches, but when the public gathering of the faithful doesn't reflect in any significant way the private life of the community, then it's irrelevant, but worse still, it's deceitful. If the church continues to be a place where some people have all the say and others have nothing to say, this silent, invisible revulsion will eventually explode. People want their voices back. They want their churches back. They want to be part of a faith community and a worship experience that involves conversation, honesty, vulnerability, creativity, and consensus. They do want biblical truth, but they seem to think that you can have a meaningful experience of God's presence without sitting silently in rows, all facing the front. Philip Yancey, writing in Christianity Today, having talked about how his church experience encouraged him to dislike himself, to be always questing to be someone or something different, says, "Ultimately I came to see that my entire project of reconstructing my personality had been misguided. God did not want to work with a wholly different personality. He chose me, just as I was. Since God accepts us where we are, surely we ought to expect our churches to do the same thing." For the record, this effort is not an attempt to declare that every person that ever stood in a pulpit, or for that matter still stands in one before a group of God's people, is not genuine. I did so for 25 years. There are a multitude of honest servants trying to take care of a flock of sheep. That's beyond question. So to all those dear brothers and sisters that are actively serving, I pray that the great shepherd of the sheep will lead you into all the truth and see that your people need setting free. The system pastors struggle with is not just difficult, it's impossible. It's like entering a forest with a hammer to cut down trees. It's impossible because the system they grapple with has no precedent in the Word. It's also demoralizing because it effectively defeats the purpose they hope to achieve. Instead of their flocks becoming strong, they remain weak. Their churches have revolving doors that frustrated, dissatisfied sheep walk through as they wander from church to church, from high place to high place, looking for reality. It's building with straw because it has no scriptural foundation. In spite of the fact that many good things happen within the system, the good should never be the enemy of the best. For this reason, many Christians are no longer loyal to one church. Pastors must rely on the happy hour on Sunday mornings to accomplish everything they want to do. The instrument they depend upon is a 30 to 45-minute monologue delivered from the pulpit called the sermon. A typical Sunday menu consists largely of this homily aimed at producing warm and fuzzy feelings. It is preceded by a song service and some announcements, and voila, it's all over. There is little time for anything else, and not much desire for anything more. Nowadays, saints are loath to come out on Sunday nights in appreciable numbers, except on rare occasions, and why should they? Boring preaching has produced disinterested listeners. The reality is this: the demands upon workers by employers nowadays are greater than they have ever been, and so their time is too precious to waste. Prayer meetings and Bible studies are poorly attended, while departmental leaders try to revive programs under a different slogan that proved fruitless last time round. You see, activities are a must to keep the faithful loyal to their franchise, because they might begin to wander. But then they face another problem. because the saints seem to have no inclination to come out midweek, because they don't want to be drafted into some dumb program, and that's a fact. Perhaps if all the faithful received a pay package similar to their pastors, they too would have time for all these fruitless activities, but alas, they live in a real world and must go to work and earn a living to feed their families. All the while, pastors with great expectations attend costly conferences to learn the latest techniques. They are told this will hone their gift and get their church up and running. In addition, some will spend time at home on their knees seeking for keys to take their community for God. But sadly, they can't seem to get His cooperation or the troops motivated. If the modern pastor as we see him today is as important as he claims, then why is this high-profile, prominent individual who sticks out like a sore toe not seen frequently throughout the New Testament church? Ephesians 4:11-13 is the text quoted to establish his bona fides. In rank of importance, he doesn't even make Paul's list in 1 Corinthians 2:27-30. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses let everything be established. But this man, who believes he has a mandate from God to corral, lead, and be the guiding light of a local flock, cannot even be seen once, yet alone 2 or 3 times in the entire history of the New Testament church. If he is so absolutely indispensable to our well-being, then why is he so conspicuous by his invisibility? The New Testament does not support the exalted position given him in the modern church. He is without contradiction, an interloper, intruding in God's affairs. He cannot be seen in Acts, nor did he ever exist in Paul's thinking. He has about as much validity as Bigfoot. You cannot build a case for the modern pastor on one proof text, or then you become just as guilty as the Mormons who baptize for the dead. Such a prominent individual would have to be seen many times, not only throughout the churches that the apostles planted, but there would be many scriptures to validate his position. Do we have the right to ignore the infallible history of Acts and the epistles, in spite of the fact that some teach that the book of Acts is not reliable for doctrinal exposition? Is the New Testament account unreliable? Or is it possible that our interpretation is flawed? Pastors as we see them today are non-existent in the inspired record. I realize that any attempt to influence pastors to accept this truth is no more likely to succeed, or the futile attempts of the prophets when they warned Judah of impending judgment. 2 Chronicles 36:16. But Jesus never changed the Jewish mindset, if indeed he ever intended or wanted to, and Luther never changed the Catholics. What did they do? They went out from among them. It was their only course. Hindsight reveals that change has always been unacceptable to organized religion. Most churches grow, peak, plateau, and then begin to die spiritually, eventually fading away. You may say yours is different. Well, I wouldn't hold my breath on that one, because history proves otherwise. Some ministers have embarked upon self-destructive building programs that all but destroyed their church, leaving another generation with a mammoth financial burden, while they move on to greater follies. These ambitious projects are a mute testimony to failed human effort and can be found in every major city around the world. That's undeniable, because the ruins are there for all to see, and I can take you to some of them. While the causes and effects should not be lost to us, hindsight doesn't lie. Don't let your pastor become another statistic. This was the headline in a prominent charismatic magazine. Recent surveys indicate that pastors need all the encouragement they can get. 50% feel unable to meet the needs of the job. 80% believe that pastoral ministry has affected their family negatively. 70% say they have lower self-esteem than when they first started the ministry. 40% report a serious conflict with a parishioner at least once a month. 70% do not have someone they consider a friend. The source was the National Day of Prayer Task Force. Remember the words of Harry Truman? If you can't take the heat, and most can't, stay out of the kitchen. Well, if you can't take the heat, Pastor, get out of the pulpit. This is the end of the first section of The Counterfeit Church.